The Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Atlanta opened the King's Mail, provided transportation and housing for the guests that came to Dr. King's funeral. Let's just think about that. A few months ago, one of my colleagues, the Reverend Terrence Strauss, who is the senior minister of the Atlanta congregation, came into possession of these precious handwritten letters from Dr. Martin Luther King and his wife, Coretta Scott King. Now, she had heard that these letters had existed at one time, but no one had seen them for a long time. And then a congregant found them in their basement. That happens in congregations, doesn't it? Finding congregational treasures in your basement. Let me tell you a little bit of the story of the Kings and the Atlanta UU congregation from the words of Reverend Strauss. Once upon a time, in 1960 specifically, Ebenezer Baptist Church and the United Liberal Church, as the congregation was called back then, decided to hold racially integrated youth group meetings. At the time, Coretta Scott King was Ebenezer's youth group leader. The Ku Klux Klan called Ebenezer in the minister's absence and threatened violence at the next integrated gathering. Mrs. King and the other church leaders decided the meeting would go on, but would advise the parents so they could keep their children home if they wished. No parent felt like they could keep their children home, and the fathers of both churches surrounded Ebenezer in a ring of protection. Reports are that the only disturbance was a group of men in a car shouting insults. They may or may not have been the Klan. Reverend Taryn continues, "When I read these letters for the first time, I was overwhelmed with emotion. A lot of emotion. I was moved because UUCA was not being thanked for prophetic ministry. It was not our protests in the streets, nor in the halls of the Capitol, nor our physical presence at the March on Selma. No, it was our pastoral ministry that made the most difference to the King family and to the civil rights movement as a whole. We were simply helping a family in need during the greatest crisis that they had ever known. And not by simply bringing a dish, no. We were helping to organize food, lodging, and travel for their out-of-town guests coming to Dr. King's funeral. We helped them sort and answer the mountains of mail they were receiving from across the globe. There was an intimate level of neighborliness that you could only do if you were already in deep relationship. I was overwhelmed with pride at being a small part of the legacy of this congregation. That there was a time when we were in proximity with the epicenter of the civil rights movement, not by politics or even activism, but by close pastoral friendship. This was a church that really knew how to be a church. I was feeling awash in humility and honored to simply be connected to you, let alone serve as your minister." End quote. Prophetic ministry is often grounded in pastoral care. In a religious context, pastoral care means how we care for each other. It is how the ministers pastor to the flock, indeed, but it is also how the congregants pastor each other. The Atlanta congregation was in intimate relationship with the Kings, and when tragedy struck, they provided pastoral care, feeding, driving, handling mail, carrying the burden of the logistics so that the family could mourn. They were pastors for the King family, a great honor indeed. Let me think of other ways that we provide pastoral care as a prophetic act. How many of you are familiar with the organization SURJ, S-U-R-J? Anyone know them? A few. It's an organization that stands for Showing Up for Racial Justice. It's an organization made up of mostly white folks who are wanting to work for and support racial justice. A big part of what they teach their members is service, humility, and relationship. They create relationships with organizations that are directly working for racial justice, groups like Black Lives Matter. And when there is an action, SURJ shows up and does what needs to be done. Mostly manages the trash, hands out water bottles, and cleans up. The jobs that the organizers need to care for their people, the jobs that they can do so that the organizers can do justice. So that the Black and brown folks who are organizing it can focus their efforts on their most important tasks of organizing. Prophetic work is often pastoral. Prophetic pastoral work often happens here at UUCP. When folks at Poder and Puente are at the ICE offices protesting for someone to be released, or when Black Lives Matter folks were marching after the death of George Floyd in the summer of 2020, several of our members showed up to provide care and support. They did not put themselves at the front of the marches, no. Amanda Rogers showed up in her station wagon and handed out water most days of the march. Her station wagon became quite well known and got its own Facebook page. Stephanie Vidmosko took Gatorade to the ICE headquarters and handed it out to protesters in the heat of the summer. Janine Gelsinger brought pizzas. Prophetic work is often pastoral. When we provide pastoral care to each other, we are saying, your needs are greater than mine right now, and I have something that I can give you. We are also saying that our egos are not involved right now. What do you need? How can I help fill that need? This is a radical act, especially in racial justice areas where white supremacy culture often prioritizes the comfort and needs of white folks over those with Black and brown bodies. To say that we are going to use our resources, our bodies, our talents for the care of our Black siblings is not only helpful, it is counter-cultural and even could be thought of as resistance. I am envisioning the ring of parents surrounding the space where the youth group was meeting. When I imagine it, I imagine the parents facing outwards. As Reverend Strauss says, they were protecting the youth group and establishing a safe haven for learning and worship. But their eyes and their hearts were facing outwards. How can we look outwards? How can we provide protection and care and support? How can we listen not just to our own needs, but how can we listen to community leaders and be there when they need us for the big jobs and for the little ones? This congregation is actually very good at pastoral care. We have pastoral care associates who are invested in helping our congregation. We jump in for meal trains when needed. And I see you all helping each other informally all the time. Our opportunity is to take that caring nature that we already have and apply it to prophetic causes when we get the chance. It is to build relationships so that when we can make a difference, we can. When it's needed, we can be there. It is to look to how we can support those most impacted by making their lives easier. Pastoral care is indeed prophetic. In the 1960s, the UU congregation of Atlanta was deep in support of the civil rights movement. So was UUCP. Ray Manker, the minister of this congregation for almost 30 years, received a lot of notifications and awards for his service. Reverend Susan Frederick Gray showed up in radical ways to fight against immigration hatred. We have turned outwards and served when the times have demanded it. The parents in Atlanta turned outwards. They looked outside of themselves and they stood guard so that the work of justice could happen. May we have the same fortitude, the same care, the same understanding, the same knowledge of where we can do the most help. May we be the ones who provide the pastoral care, who open the mail, bring water, drive and house people, bring meals, pick up the trash. May we be the ones who say, we don't have to be in the center. We can be the center of support. May we be the ones who show up. May we be the ones who look outwards. So might it be.